associates, and Elizabeth is also one of our redesigners here, and they're also part of Fair Fashion UGA, so they're going to talk a little bit about that and brought their Vice President, Sarah Kay,
yes.
right? And so we're going to hear a little bit about the issues of fast fashion from them. I want to start with just introducing who I am and how I got here. So I'm originally from Germany. I came here as an exchange student in the late 90s to study at UGA for a year. Kind of fell in love with Athens. I went back to Germany and finished my degree and then moved here permanently in 2000. I was a musician at the time. I had a few bands in town and really wanted to pursue music. And that was financially challenging. Never really made any money with music. And so to support myself on the side, I started selling vintage in a few places in town. Started out at Agora, and then that grew into providing me with an income within a couple of years or so. And so when I was kind of ready to step away from music, this opportunity came up that I could open my own store in town. And so yeah, I signed the lease in the Varsity parking lot. Very old school, and this was a different space. It was upstairs from Jidder Joe's on the corner of Jackson and Broad, where now a part of the K artist shop is. And yeah, and like on a total shoestring, I opened my vintage boutique. The concept was a little different then. It was mostly more traditional vintage, but focused on contemporary fashions and styles. But I did also want to give local designers kind of a boutique setting. I noticed there were some people in town that were starting to make clothing, and there wasn't really an outlet for them to sell clothes. And I was really interested in fashion at the time and started to learn how to sew, and learned from a friend by redesigning some of those vintage clothing. And that is when the clothing line, our clothing line community service started. So it was all kind of happened at the same time. I was also a founding member of a group called the Athens Fashion Collective then. Just like some like-minded people that were really excited about fashion and wanted to make something happen in town at a time when there wasn't really anything much happening in terms of fashion shows. So we started putting on fashion shows, showcasing local designers, and I started showing collections at those shows as well. And so, yeah, so that's kind of what the beginning was like. In addition to local designers, I also wanted to sell other local products, but again, in the beginning, we didn't have a lot of that, but we had some locally made jewelry and some gift items, and that has grown into a much bigger part of our business now, local products. So in 2016, we moved into this location because the other location was upstairs and we were just kind of hidden away, and it was a little difficult to get people up there, so I felt like we needed to really have a storefront. So we've been here since then, and I'm very happy with the space. And then in 2020, of course, COVID hit, and that was really like a big pivot for us because we shut down for a few months, immediately opened an online store, which we didn't have before, and then basically pivoted to mass production. So for about a year or longer, we were mainly doing face masks, which there was a big shortage, if you remember, in the beginning of COVID. So we did a fundraiser for the hospital and made over 5,000 masks for them, for Piedmont at the time still. And then also when UGA first started bringing back their maintenance personnel, we made 2,000 masks for them. And so that really kept us afloat through 2020, and then it kind of died off because there were a lot of masks available. After about 6 months or so, they were much more affordably produced in other countries than what we could do, and so now we pivoted back to making clothing again. Yeah, so that's a little bit of kind of the history. And then in terms of our mission, so generally we want to have a minimal impact on the environment with the clothing, so really avoiding a negative impact on the environment. We want to reconnect customers with the process on how clothing is being made and who makes them. So a big part of our mission is that we consciously have the sewing area as part of the retail space, because we are so disconnected from the process of how clothes are being made and who makes our clothes, that we wanted to break down that wall and really open it up and have people see our seamstresses working back there, invite conversation, invite questions, and just raise awareness of that all clothing is still made by people, and just really kind of make the process visible. And then another part of our mission is to maximize the economic impact on the local economy. So we're only selling Georgia-made products at this point. Mostly our vendors are Athens-based, but some of them are from other places in Georgia. So we're really trying to keep more money in the community. And yeah, so our concept is the way we do sustainable fashion is we sell vintage clothing. We redesign vintage clothing, which means we're taking existing pieces and we modify them by either changing the shape or the fit, cropping them, making them more contemporary style. So basically, vintage clothing often is great materials, but often have a dated look. And so we're redesigning the vintage clothing to make them kind of desirable for today's market. We also make some clothing from scratch, from vintage or sustainable materials. And we sell local designers, small lines, small collections that are made locally. So this is kind of our definition of how we do sustainable fashion. Then we offer sewing classes again. We actually took a break from that because of COVID, but that is a part of our mission as well, that we want to teach the community some sewing and mending skills, so they can create a more sustainable wardrobe for themselves. We offer alterations. It originally started because when you sell vintage and one of a kind, you only have pieces in one size usually, and so alterations just offers the ability to make it fit different bodies and just gives more opportunity for people to find something that works for them. But then that part has grown into a big part of the business. In fact, it was its own business in here for a little while, and we're just reabsorbing it because our main seamstress, Becky, is leaving to become an electrician. And so we're in the process of looking for a new alteration seamstress, in case you know anybody. But we have a lot of people coming and bringing pieces, like just regular alterations, so we don't just do alterations on pieces that we have here, but people can bring anything in. We even work on the Georgia Bulldog jerseys, which has been very exciting for the last 3 seasons, where we sew on patches, special patches or name patches on the jerseys, and repair them after every game when they get torn. So alterations has become a big part of why people come into community. Alterations, of course, is in alignment also with the sustainability aspect of making clothing last longer. We can do some redesigns for customers. So if an item, they don't like the style anymore, we can help change the style to keep it modern. Or if people fluctuate in size, we can make sure they can still wear their clothing. And we do a lot of clothing repairs as well. We also do offer some custom design and bespoke clothing. So we have a trained fashion designer, Moana, who's also from Germany by chance. And so we can make some custom clothing as well. We're going to be making some clothing for a local musician right now, and also like a group of bridesmaids that want like jumpsuits, matching jumpsuits. So that's something we don't do a lot of, but I would love to build that a little bit more, because I think it's a great service also if we can make bespoke fashion, because making things that people are actually going to wear for sure is also more sustainable than making a big production and then maybe not everything gets sold. And then, of course, we sell a lot of local products, which I've already mentioned. We have over 50 local vendors. Meredith is going to talk a lot more about that. Yeah, so that's kind of the overview. I guess I did want to mention one thing. One of my dreams or goals is a more sustainable regional supply chain, particularly for clothing. A few years ago, I think it was also in 2016, the Athens Fashion Collective and I put on an event called Georgia's Zone, which was part fashion show, but also an expo that was trying to connect regional fashion designers with producers for materials that they can use. So like trying to source regionally fabric and thread and buttons, and so anything that they might need to create their collections. We realized pretty quickly that it was a bigger challenge than we thought to find these producers. We were kind of trying to find like what was left of the Georgia textile industry and connect them with young, new designers, and realized that there wasn't that much left of the Georgia textile industry, or at least not a complete regional supply chain that we were able to find. There was a lot of cotton still grown in Georgia. There was some cotton gins, but then after the gins, cotton mills, we didn't really find anything, and so we couldn't really find fabric that was made in Georgia. And if there was, I think there was some denim, it wasn't available to us in the small quantities that we would have wanted. Like we would have had to order like 40,000 yards or something like that if we wanted some local denim. And so that was really eye-opening and interesting to see like how much of the textile industry has really disappeared. We were able to find some other, like we had some vendors for sure, but it was like on a smaller scale. Like we had some local wool, which was cool. We made some sweaters. I knitted some sweaters from local wool for the fashion show. We had some thread, and there was a little bit. There was some cut and sew places. A couple have already shut down since then. And then some local lines, like clothing lines, that they were kind of selling. But there was really not much. And that's still something that I would love to, work on more in some way, maybe in collaboration with UGA, or so, to kind of really find what's still left and trying to connect those dots, and really trying to find more regional sources for material, for clothing production. Yeah, so I just wanted to mention that as well. But now I'm handing over to Elaine. All right, yes, Elaine. All right, come on up.
Okay, well, hi everyone. My name is Elaine. we are all a part of at UGA, and also talk a little bit about fast fashion and its impacts on the planet and also the people who live on it. So first and foremost, Fair Fashion is a UGA student organization dedicated to teaching students how to consume fashion through a more ethical and sustainable means. And we do this through a lot of different ways. We do workshops, panels that Sonny has been a part of before, different networking and student outreach, which has been probably my biggest joy of my college experience. And I'm excited to say that we are partnering with Community, and this April for Fashion Revolution Week, we will be hosting a clothing swap here, which is a really great way to get like new to you clothes without contributing to overconsumption or fast fashion. So we'll be putting out some advertising for that soon. So I would love to see all you guys there. It's gonna be really fun. So to pivot to talking about fast fashion. So what is it? Essentially, fast fashion is the mass production of low cost and low quality garments at a very rapid speed. And fast fashion is the product of an increased pace in the trend cycle, mass consumerism, and just a lack of environmental awareness, accountability, and litigation. And we've really seen this huge shift kind of within like the past 50 years. Like 50 years ago, fast fashion wasn't even a term that really existed, as most of our clothing here in the US was produced domestically. And since that, we've seen just the outsourcing of all the manufacturing and production of fashion, which has given these companies an opportunity to create really cheap clothing. And additionally from that, we've seen kind of a shift in the culture, even from shopping being something that was done out of necessity or at the beginning of every new season, and now it's something that's almost a hobby and you'll do in your free time. Like, oh, I can buy this because it's cheap, and why not? It's a $5 t-shirt. So I just kind of wanted to talk about why that is problematic, especially in terms of human rights and sustainability. So first of all, it's pretty impossible if you think of the logistics of it. If you are buying a $5-10 t-shirt, and that is with that company making a profit margin, how much can the person who made that t-shirt possibly be making? So cheap fashion is inevitably a human rights issue, with these garment workers being paid really, really low wages, and a lot of the time working in really unsafe conditions. A lot of the times these factories are located in really vulnerable communities where a lot of these garment workers don't have another viable work option aside from working in this factory. So it's not, I feel like I hear the argument a lot of the time, well, they chose to work there, which is true, but they didn't necessarily have a lot of options. And these people are just trying to make a living just like us. And a recent example of this was, I believe, in 2013 in Bangladesh. There was a factory called the Rana Plaza factory that was producing some of the world's most famous fast fashion brands. I believe like Walmart, H&M, and like Primark, just to name a few, were all producing clothes in this factory. And the building was not up to code. The workers are working in very dangerous conditions. The building structure was not sound. And the people who were running this factory were aware of this issue, but they knew that they had to keep churning out this product to keep the fast fashion cycle going. And the building tragically collapsed and killed over 1,000 garment workers. And from that horrific incident, we have that's when fashion revolution began, which is, I'm gonna talk about a little bit later with the clothing swap. So since then, it has become, that kind of raised awareness for the human rights issues that occur in fast fashion. So there's more awareness of it now, and like with places like Community and Fair Fashion, we're just trying to spread awareness so people are aware of the humans that are making their clothes. And again, with having this sewing area connected in the store, connecting people with the people who make their clothes, because I feel like it's really easy to forget about that and not think about where your clothes came from. But it really is a human making them, and they deserve working conditions and living wages, obviously. So now I'm going to pass it on to Sarah Kate, and she's going to talk about a little bit of the environmental side of fast fashion.
Thank you, Elaine. Hi, I'm Sarah Kate. I'm a fourth-year fashion merchandising student at the University of Georgia. I'm also earning 2 certificates in sustainability and environmental ethics, and I am the vice president of Fair Fashion alongside Elaine. So as she mentioned, I'm just going to talk about briefly just the environmental concerns and direct impacts of fast fashion that we really could talk about for a very long time. But just to get a brief introduction to it, most of fast fashion apparel is made out of synthetic fibers. So the most common examples of this would be polyester and acrylic. These synthetic fibers are made of plastic, which means they're incredibly environmentally damaging if they were to ever end up in landfill, which they very commonly do. So due to fast fashion's dependency on really fast turnaround rates from production to the sales floor, that means that these plastic synthetic fibers are generally, cannot talk, pretty low quality. They're not very durable like a lot of sustainable fabrics are. So they are turned out really quickly, and then they're also not very durable, so they do not last that long, and a lot of times that leads to consumers having clothing waste that ends up in the landfill. Because they're made out of plastic, they can take up to 500 years to biodegrade. This directly correlates to increased greenhouse gas emissions in landfills. Also, there was a case of Burberry, the London fashion house. I think it was in 2015. It was reported that they were burning tons and tons of their clothing waste, which was really just unsold merchandise from like the previous few years. So that report came out. They have since pledged that they don't do that anymore. I don't know. Who's to know? But that's just one case of another tragic environmental damage directly correlated to fast fashion, the fashion industry. So yeah, landfill, burning, things like that. And then the average American throws away about 80 pounds of clothing waste annually. That typically ends up in landfill. If not here, then it is sometimes donated to other countries and just ends up in landfill there, which is really sad. So yeah, really this just could all be lessened if the average consumer were to work on shifting their thinking from fast fashion and quick trend cycles, as Elaine was mentioning, just to sustainable fashion and more slow fashion practices as we shop. It could really change the fashion industry into being an investment, and clothes would be an investment rather than becoming waste within the year or a few years prior to or after buying it. So community is combating fast fashion by selling sustainably made products and redesigning, as Sonny was mentioning earlier, and I'm going to pass it over to Elizabeth to talk more about that.
All right. Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I'm a fourth-year psychology major with a Spanish minor and a women's studies minor. So not really fashion related, but thankfully I've been able to get involved with fair fashion and community. But I work as a seamstress in the back with community service, which, as Sonia mentioned earlier, we work on altering vintage clothing to make more cohesive and modern looks that are polished. We have a few examples up here of some pieces that we've worked on over the years. But basically we're just trying to get creativity involved in this process of making clothing, and I will say it is such a privilege to be in such a safe and special place while working as a seamstress, because as we've discussed, it's not common across the world and in the United States. So I guess I'll go ahead and start with our spring collection. We have a few examples over here of quilting technique that's usually common in Korea. And this uses scrap pieces to create sort of a patchwork style. So here we're adding these two linen garments to add, I guess, more of a stylistic and design piece. And all of these shirts have been thrifted secondhand, but still remain like with good quality because it is very like durable fibers. So we'll have a few of these out in the spring if you're interested. Very excited for it. here, another part of our line, we have these jersey tees. This fabric was spun at a local mill sort of deal, but the UGA Textiles lab donated this fabric to us. So we've been able to transform it into a line of shirts, dresses around the store, and continue that clothing life cycle of the textile that we received. Here we have a piece that Sonia made, and I believe this was for a fashion show that you hosted with the collective that you were a part of.
At the Georgia Museum. It
Uh-huh.
was inspired by an art exhibition by this artist called Lerda, who did a lot of collaging, so I took that inspiration for that patchwork.
It's gorgeous, but we haven't been doing as much of this sort of thing just because like with the creativity also comes discontinuity of our line at community service. So hopefully we can get back into this as street styles are up and coming and continue to be prominent in the demand for fashion, but this is another fun example of something that we do. Over here we have a beautiful patchwork denim dress, and this is another example of how we're using our scrap pieces to transform them with more complex designs. Overall, I guess, just to reduce the amount of waste that we produce from our local supply chain. And then finally, we have a few local vendors here, which we're trying to engage more with. There's tons of talent in the Athens community. So here is a line by Hannah James with her velvet dresses and then her hand-dyed silk dresses as well. So just supporting and uplifting Athens designers as well as our own community service. And I know Sonia mentioned this earlier too, but just ways that we can all work to continue our garment life cycles include mending, upcycling, and then teaching, just overall learning more about the process of garment production. And it sounds like the sustainability department is already doing a lot of those things, hosting mending workshops and whatnot. But I know community will also be having sewing lessons too, so stay tuned to that and just keep doing what we're doing. And after that, I guess Meredith is going to talk more about the local supply and all of our vendors.
I'm Meredith. I'm the manager of community, but for a longer time I've handled vendor communication. I'm going to talk a little bit about our sustainability efforts in regard to the products we carry from local vendors. One huge impact for my local goods is simply cutting down on carbon emissions. Locally owned businesses can make more local purchases, requiring less transportation, and generally operate from within city centers as opposed to developing on the outskirts of the city. More commercial districts leads to less traffic congestion, sprawl, which ultimately reduces the amount of fuel emission that contributes to air pollution. In addition to being environmentally conscious, supporting local businesses is vital to keeping small towns thriving economically. A study done by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance found that small businesses reinvest in the local economy at a higher rate than chain businesses, and that for every $100 spent, $68 goes back into the community. And in contrast, only $43 for every $100 spent stays within a community unspent at a non-local business, like a national chain. Our priority, apart from increasing sustainability efforts, is to increase sales that will regenerate within our local community. And one product that highlights multiple local vendors and is generally sold in larger quantities is our Athens gift box. This gift box is customizable and available in pre-made options, but most importantly, it enables us to generate more sales for our vendors, as our gift box clients tend to be larger businesses like banks like Synovus and Joiner Associates or Joiner Properties. notes and slow down. To change gears a little, I'd also like to talk about our sustainable packaging efforts. And sustainable packaging refers to sourcing, development, and use of packaging solutions that have a minimal environmental impact and footprint. This regards packages we ship to customers and product packaging within the store. We utilize recycled and recyclable materials wherever possible, from our checkout bags to envelopes, shipping envelopes, bathroom supplies, and so on. This past year we started using biodegradable cellophane plastic bags to protect clothing and products that we're shipping. And so I'd also like to open the discussion later about if we have time, biodegradable plastic packaging, because I'm aware that sometimes these are coated with petroleum-based plastics, and so I'm not quite sure how to, what companies are actually being true to what they're saying. We also eliminate unnecessary packaging materials and reuse packaging that's sent to us from vendors. One vendor who always goes above and beyond is Vicalia Botanicals. I got really excited about this. She sent us water-soluble packaging units. So I have a box of those today. But also, I wanted to point out these products that we carry from vendors, like Normal Soap Company uses biodegradable plastic. Most of our vendors use minimal packaging or paper packaging, and also compostable. This brings me to my point about how sustainable products and packaging shape our future as a business. And I'm going to throw out some boring stats. A 2019 study by CGS, a global provider of business applications, found that of 1,000 consumers, almost 70% considered sustainability as at least somewhat important. And a survey done in 2021 by Greenpoint, an environmental technology company, shows that millennials are more willing to pay for an environmentally sustainable product than any other generation, which is really encouraging. But I think that puts the responsibility on businesses like ours to not just use packaging that's not really making a difference, that's just greenwashing, and to really make an effort. So I think we've all seen the shift in priorities as the general public has become more educated about global warming and the effects of these changes on the world. It might be a small impact, but we want to put as much thought into the materials that we're using for shipping and products as we do the fabrics that we're using for our clothing line. Yeah. And that's it. Okay. Oh, I also wanted to mention products that source locally, because that's something that we'd like to move towards. Or vendors, U-Garden, those are locally sourced herbs from UGA. Me Plus Tea does that as well. Heartsong Herbs, she grows her own organic herbs. And Tallahassee Highlands is a local apiary. Yep.
And so now I want to talk a little bit at the end about challenges that we face, and also want to invite your input maybe if you have some ideas for solutions, and also any kind of questions you have. So challenges have been with sourcing. So aside from the sustainable supply chain, I source most of our vintage clothing still from thrift stores, because we are really selective in what we want to sell in terms of the kind of materials, and also creating cohesive collections from one-of-a-kind pieces kind of makes it necessary too to be selective about colors and certain styles, so we can really have like collections that look like collections. So it's been difficult to find enough of the kind of styles that we're selling well, which limits us in terms of growth. We are currently selling our line in a boutique in Atlanta, and we have been in a boutique in Savannah, and we would like to expand more, but it's been difficult to really scale up in that way. There is one vintage wholesale place in Atlanta that I go to more and more. It's a little more expensive, but I can buy a lot of vintage at once rather than when I go to thrift stores. You go through like fast fashion, and like, oh, this is vintage, but it's not the right style, and so it's just a lot more time consuming. While in Atlanta, it's maybe not all our style, but at least it's pre-selected and it's only vintage that I look through. But I feel like at this point, I would like to scale up more. I think there are opportunities for us out there to be in more boutiques and to sell more online, and it's been a challenge. So I'm looking for ideas. Another challenge for us has always been keeping an affordable price point, because we do pay American wages compared to when fashion is produced overseas. We usually are able to keep the material costs really low, but the labor costs on their own get us to a pretty high price point pretty quickly. The solution so far has been to work with the existing clothing by redesigning. It is just less labor generally. I mean, not something like this, of course, but like it's less labor to put a piece on here than to make the whole garment from scratch. So we are generally able, at least with the more basic redesigns that we do, to keep a price point that is maybe comparable to Urban Outfitters or so. But when we make pieces from scratch, we're easily in like the $250, $300 price point, and it's really hard to stay below that because it does take a lot of time to make clothing from scratch, and we're doing such small productions or one-of-a-kind pieces that it's hard to just do it quickly. Generally, I don't think we're not like in the $1,000 price point, but for Athens, a $300 dress is a pretty high price point. So for the market here, it's been challenging to keep it affordable. Size inclusivity has been challenging. We've been trying to make some efforts in being more size inclusive recently. So we are able to find vintage clothing in larger sizes that we've been bringing in plus sizes. But when we make clothing from scratch, each size requires a separate pattern that has to be made. And if we only make maybe 2 or 3 pieces in each size, it is a huge cost for us to produce these patterns. And so it's just, and I've talked with other small designers about that want to be more size inclusive, but then unless you are switching completely to a plus size line, it's just hard to have that really expanded sizing and make that financially happen. And then the other challenge we face is selling our pieces online, because they are all one of a kind, or most of them. So that creates a huge amount of work to list things online. So every piece has to be photographed separately, measured, description, listed online, and then we have one piece to sell, while a regular clothing company might have 100 of the same pieces to sell. And so that's been a challenge in terms of how much time are we able to invest in these photo shoots and in the online store, and then have enough variety in our online store that people with different sizes have enough to choose from, and not just like 2 or 3 pieces. So those are our challenges, and I'm kind of ending our presentation here, but I would love to have a conversation or discussion. So if you have any questions or suggestions.
And I also kind of wanted to open the discussion to finding local packaging sources.
Mm-hmm. Like paper or paper products. So we haven't really, I haven't done a lot of research right now. We're sourcing from Nashville wraps.
And we want to incentivize the vendors using sustainable packaging as well.
Mm-hmm.
But with supply chain issues being what they've been lately, it's just difficult. It would be great if there were more local options.
had a thought on one of your challenges
Yes.
as far as selling the specialized clothing. You just have one of the style. Have you looked at any of the, like I've seen like Instagram Live where they do live sales? Have y'all looked at doing anything like that?
We did that during COVID. Actually, we did that while we were closed. That was a way for us to stay connected with the customer and sell some online. And yeah, that did go pretty well. It wasn't, I feel like it dropped off a bit after when people were more able to come out and come in person again. But yeah, that is a good
Which
point.
I'm sure it's more challenging because you want to try on your clothes. So, but I have seen a lot of shows where they, you know, have people buying stuff straight off of
That's true.
Facebook or
And that
whatever.
is a great way of just showing the item and describing it, and without having to do the photo shoot and all of that other, what it entails.
And there's fancy systems too where it like keeps track of comments and who sold and stuff too.
Okay.
I don't know a lot about it, but I've seen how you have to like say a specific
Uh-huh.
sold something and then
And then
it
you're
logs
next
it
in
so that
line.
you know who got what.
Okay, yeah, I want to look into that more. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
So I have a sewing machine and I do not know how to use. It's a Bernadina, and so is that possible to bring it here and get a lesson on how to use that perhaps?
I think we can definitely make that happen, like a private lesson, or you could take the beginner sewing class. Have you sewn on another machine before?
Yeah, on a cast iron, old cast iron.
Okay.
So very different.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we can definitely arrange that to have like a private lesson, or you could take we usually start with the 4 weeks beginners course, which is a lot of it is about how to use your machine, and then just make a couple of basic pieces.
I had a question to see if you had any insight into thrift stores and how much waste they have. Because I love with the fair fashion, y'all were talking about the human issues, so I hadn't really thought about that with fast fashion before. But I think one thing a lot of people don't think about is they buy something, they can just donate to the thrift store and it's
Right.
off their hands.
Yeah.
But how much thrift stores are getting and they can't move material,
Yeah.
so they're actually having to throw a lot away, or how much is actually getting recycled.
Yeah, so my knowledge is that they usually only can resell about 20% of what they get donated. So 80% gets distributed after that, either to companies that make rags, so that the materials get shredded and they make cleaning rags for like manufacturing places, which then of course also ends up in the landfill. But at least there's one more use for it. And then a lot of it gets shipped off to third world countries, particularly Africa. Actually, the vintage wholesale place that I shop at, they do some of that too, so they're like a global distribution company for used materials. So that has hurt the markets in those countries in Africa a lot. So a lot of African countries, the people mostly wear secondhand American clothing now, and they used to have thriving clothing industries there where they made and printed a lot of their materials and fabrics, and so that's been a challenge too. And then they often also just get the trash basically. So instead of in our landfill, it ends up in their landfill, and it's creating problems there. So I mean, textile waste, I don't know what the numbers is for Athens, Clark County, but I think it's a global issue that we're also trying to tackle. Like, I mean, we ideally like to work only with materials that already exist, because I think it is the most sustainable way of making or wearing clothing. Is basically the ones that are already in your closet, and then, you know, the next step up would be thrifting or but yeah, I mean, of course, a place like us cannot even make a dent in anything, but at least we can introduce a concept and maybe make it more acceptable for people. I've definitely noticed a big difference from when I first started thrifting, and also from when we first opened community, that there's a lot more acceptance about wearing used clothing, thrifting, resale, like prices are going up quite a bit too, which is a bit of a downside for us, but I think that's because a lot more people are wanting to buy used. So I think that there has to be a systemic change in the fashion industry. Like, I don't think anything what we're doing, or even if more people are thrifting, can solve the problem of textile waste, because there's so much overproduction that I think that has to somehow shift to a more, I don't even know, like a more sustainable clothing concept.
Yeah,
So
like
away
a more
from
circular system.
more circular, but that is another thing that, in my understanding, is there's very little recycling, actual true recycling of clothing into new fabrics. And I don't know if you all know anything about that.
I was telling Sonny the other day, I actually did a research paper on this for one of my sustainability classes on the recycling of post-consumer textiles. And I think just in the US, I got like the data from the EPA, and like just 70% of post-consumer textiles go straight to landfill because they're not able to be recycled, and we don't have like, I'm sure the technology exists, but like there are not a lot of like recycling plants that are actively recycling post-consumer textiles into new fibers. And
it is challenging. I think the technology, like, I don't think it's easy to do, because a lot of clothing or fabrics are blends of materials. So I think it's easier if you only have like 100% cotton denim or so, you know. But even that, like, you have to shred it and make it into new fibers, and that's often like lesser quality. So sometimes clothing might get made into, like, again, rags or something. But
I think a lot of the waste in places like Accra, where these pieces end up, they are just shredded into fillers.
into fillers, insulation possibly, but not. It's really difficult to make new fiber. In fact, I think it's easier with the polyester materials. Like, you know how clothes are made from water bottles sometimes? Like, it's actually easier with the fibers we don't want. But most of the clothing are blends, and I don't, to my knowledge, there isn't a lot of technology that exists that can recycle clothing into new fabrics that new clothing can be made.
It's just a lot cheaper to continue to make cheap like polyester and plastic-based synthetic fibers than it is to recycle and, you know, start like a circular design system. It is just costly.
I do think Charm does accept some fabric donations, is that correct?
But it's the rag thing, from my understanding.
Okay,
They just
so
get
they
turned
work
into
with the
rags.
company that makes rags, or
We
is it?
partner with America's Thrift, and so we send everything to them, and
They have some.
They then work with the rag dealer.
Yeah, I remember, I think the first sustainable industry roundtable I went to was at Project Safe, and there was someone there too that they work with a company from Atlanta, I think, that picks up whatever they can sell. Yeah, I mean, I have seen just some examples. It is possible, like, I think in Mexico there's a factory that recycles denim into, I don't know if new denim, but at least they work with jeans and make them into something new. So hopefully we'll see more of that develop. But I still think the solution has to be in the production more than in the recycling, because there's just too much made and too much that's low quality and has problematic clothing. So, I mean, fabrics. But I don't know, that's the price point thing is another thing that I feel like there isn't an easy solution, because clothing used to be so much more expensive. Like, we used to spend, or like percentage-wise of our income, a lot more on clothing. And you know, like I remember growing up, we would have like a clothing budget every month, and if you're a professional, then you would have like a pretty high clothing budget. And I don't know if that still exists in that way, because people are so used to buying clothing for less than eating out, or, you know, so we don't even really set aside a lot of money for clothing anymore. And so we're so used to these low prices that I think changing that that awareness in the consumer is really going to be challenging and also, but also necessary. That
I also read, and this was encouraging, that millennials in this same study, and I think it was 1,000 people or so, that the millennial age was more likely to spend 25% more on a product if they knew it was sustainable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but when you come to clothing, it's more like 200%, you know?
Yeah.
So if I could produce the same thing sustainably for 25% more, that would be amazing. I don't know yet if that's possible, but yeah. But I like that the tendency is great, and I think that raising awareness, education about this issue is happening, and I think that, you know, like when I look at Fair Fashion UGA, I mean, when I first started talking about sustainable fashion with community, I had to constantly, like when the students came and interviewed me for their class projects, I was like, okay, this is what sustainable fashion means, and like kind of define it, and now they come to me and like they know more about it than I do, and I think that's really encouraging.
And if anyone's interested in reading more, Fair Fashion also has a blog, which we help run, but sort of speaking to the like global textile issue, I think it can sort of be summed up with like the term waste colonialism, which there's an article about. And I know you asked the question, so if you're interested in hearing more about that, we have an article about it.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that like gives me a rash is after the national championship, you know, there was a line out at Academy to get, you know, the new winners. There was a line also probably lining up in Alabama. So all those shirts, they were ready to go out the door. And so what happened with all of those?
I actually had in one of my fashion merchandising classes like 2 weeks ago or a week ago, we had a speaker come in and talk who works, I don't remember what her exact position was or what the company was, because I wasn't really interested in hearing about it, because it was about exactly what you're talking about. She was literally talking about the clothes that they had after the Super Bowl, and I was just like getting depressed thinking about it, and I just kind of tuned her out after that. But then I asked her a question when she was done with her presentation, and I asked if it was, she never exactly said in her presentation like if they had printed all the Alabama stuff already and if it was ready to go. And so I asked that question, and I was like, she was just talking about the amount, the quantities that they have of the merchandise ready for after the Super Bowl. So I was like, did you have the same amount for Alabama stuff, just in case? And she said they actually, her company in particular, that sources to Dick's Sporting Goods and Walmart and really big retailers like that, they actually wait until after halftime, they check the score. If it's a blowout, they start printing.
Wow.
And I was really inspired by that, and I was so happy to hear that, because at least they wait till after halftime.
What if they get it wrong? What if they have a comeback?
Right, and then she said sometimes they'll just check, they'll wait till the game is fully over and they'll check, but it does, she said this was, I mean, I understand it coming from a business aspect or point of view, but she said it's really because they would be wasting so much money printing both. So sure, okay, but I was thinking like environmentally that's terrible, but yeah, so she said that a lot of times they wait till after the game to print, and they only print the winners. So I thought that was really awesome to hear as an answer, but I can't speak for every.
Right, yeah, I know you've got the people that are like out at the gate when you're
right,
coming out,
and they have literally
ready.
both T-shirts ready to go. So yeah, I mean, of course it's not every company, but at least
somebody's
At least
trying, so
somebody's
maybe
doing
that'll
it.
spread.
I was really surprised when the Georgia Bulldogs first approached us that they're repairing the jerseys.
That's
down
awesome.
there.
Yeah, I
That's
assumed that they
awesome.
just got new ones.
I thought so too. I thought they just,
That was
throw
going to
it
be my
away.
question. How did that conversation start, and what were they doing before they worked in football?
I think they had a part-time seamstress working there that might have retired or so. It was a referral from a happy Alterations customer. So we had someone that works there, I think, got a suit jacket, altered here, and was really happy with it. And so they approached us to see if we wanted to do that.
It's a great story.
Yeah, I know, and it's been very exciting, and also, like, I have to admit, nobody here really cares about football, which is kind of funny. So we're all like, okay, I remember.
I think we forgot to wish them luck.
I remember the first time, like when we did the first, patches for, or whatever the first game of the season was. I was so terrified that they would fall off during the game, and I was just I had like nightmares, like, oh no. That would be like basically the end of community, I think, but my seamstresses were like, oh no, this is not gonna fall off. I mean, they were confident about what they were doing. But of course, nothing happened. But it was definitely
That would
nerve-wracking.
be great
It's like
advertising, though. I mean, you know how St. Mary's is the hospital of the Bulldogs. Like, y'all can be the
That's
mending
true.
shop.
Yeah,
for-
we're the official alterations place.
Yeah.
We have definitely. I mean, we were on like some kind of sports TV Atlanta channel that came here. Like the first season we did it and interviewed me about football. And I'm like, it's pretty fun.
They look good. I like the silver better than the.
But yeah, I remember when recently we had a customer, and she said something about Kim Kirby, I guess, and Becky was like, "Oh yeah, is that one of the players?" So it sometimes shows that we don't really know much about football, but we're learning a lot. It's definitely been I feel like whenever I'm around people that I have a hard time connecting to, and somehow this comes up, they're like, ooh, you're really cool. I feel like I love that about football, about sports, that I feel like it really connects so many different people, so we have something like kind of to talk about, and so it's been great. But we need a new seamstress now, so if anybody knows someone who's really good at sewing, they get to work on the Georgia Bulldog jersey, so maybe that's a good selling point, or maybe that will scare people off, I don't know.
I was going to recommend a really good long form read that there's a wonderful journalist, Adam Minter, that's put out a couple books, but one of his recent books is called Secondhand, and he comes from a journalism background, and he has an amazing storytelling ability where he makes the stories very human, and like tells the specific stories of different people that work at all the different stages of these very niche recycling industries, and he traveled all over the world to report on this, and so in that book there's a couple different products that he follows, but he dives very deep into what we're talking about the global, what happens to our clothes when they can't sell at the thrift store kind of thing. And so he's been to all these different countries, and like including places in the US, but then also in Africa and Asia and South America, and I think it's a really good way to enter into it if you want to have that connection to it, because it's always the images that come into my mind are the characters that he meets and kind of telling their story. So
What's the name again?
it's called Secondhand, the book.
Okay. By Adam Minter.
Great, yeah, I'll look it up, thank you so much.
I recommended it to somebody recently who like dove in and could stop reading it.
Sweet. That's awesome, yeah. It's always good to learn more about where things are going, I feel like,
And storytelling is a great way to bring that home to people.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts or questions?
Well, thanks
Thank
again
you
so much for coming. This is
Thank
great.
you.